I came back early from a trip. I decided to cook my wife's favorite dish and told the smart speaker, "Alexa, play love songs." It answered, "Of course, Jonas. And don't forget Sandra's birthday present." In that moment I froze. Sandra is my wife, but who is Jonas? When I confronted her, I discovered, "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never expected that coming home early from a business trip would shatter my entire world. After 32 years of marriage, I thought I knew Sandra better than anyone. I was wrong. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that Thursday afternoon. Not physically different, but there was something in the air, a stillness that didn't belong. I had cut my Chicago conference short by 2 days, eager to surprise my wife. We had been distant lately, ships passing in the night, and I thought maybe a romantic gesture would help bridge whatever gap had formed between us. Sandra's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she was probably at her book club or running errands. Perfect. I had time to prepare her favorite meal, chicken parmesan with that special sauce she loved, the one her mother had taught me to make years ago when we were newlyweds. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we had shared countless meals, where our children Emma and Michael had done homework at the counter, where Sandra and I had planned our dreams over morning coffee. The familiar routine of cooking calmed my nerves. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe the distance between us was just a phase. As I seasoned the chicken, I decided to set the mood with some music. We had gotten the smart speaker last Christmas, and while I still struggled with technology sometimes, I had learned to appreciate the convenience. "Alexa, play love songs," I called out, wiping my hands on the dish towel. The response came immediately, in that familiar artificial voice that had become part of our household. "Of course, Jonas. And don't forget Sandra's anniversary gift." I froze. The raw chicken slipped from my hands back onto the cutting board. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. Jonas. Who the hell was Jonas? I stared at the small black device sitting innocently on our kitchen counter, as if it hadn't just delivered the most devastating blow of my 64-year-old life. My hands trembled as I tried to process what had just happened. The smart speaker had called me Jonas, but my name is Donald Richardson. I had been Donald Richardson for 64 years, unless someone else had been using our Alexa, someone named Jonas. The love song started playing in the background, suddenly mocking instead of romantic. I turned off the music with shaking hands and stood in the silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the device was confused. Maybe there was some logical explanation that didn't involve my wife having another man in our home while I was away. But deep down, in that place where we store the truths we don't want to acknowledge, I knew this wasn't a mistake. I heard Sandra's car pulling into the driveway, and panic shot through me. I quickly resumed preparing dinner, trying to look normal, trying to pretend that my world hadn't just tilted off its axis. The front door opened, and I heard her familiar footsteps, the click of her heels on the hardwood floor we had installed together 5 years ago. "Donald?" Her voice carried from the entryway. "You're home early." There was something in her tone, a note I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, yes, but also something else. Nervousness. "Surprise!" I called back, forcing cheer into my voice. "I'm making your favorite." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her navy blue dress, her gray hair perfectly styled as always. Sandra had aged gracefully, maintaining the elegance that had first attracted me in college. But as she looked at me now, I noticed something I had been missing. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "That's wonderful, honey." She set her purse on the counter, the same spot she had used for decades. "How was the conference?" "Boring," I lied, studying her face. "I missed you." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I missed you too." We had been married for 32 years. I knew her smiles, knew the difference between genuine joy and polite performance. This was definitely performance. As we sat down to dinner, I watched her more carefully than I had in years. The way she avoided direct eye contact, the way her fingers fidgeted with her wedding ring, the way she kept glancing at her phone. Small details I had been too busy or too trusting to notice before. "How was book club today?" I asked, cutting into my chicken. Book club? She looked momentarily confused, then recovered quickly. Oh, it was fine. We discussed the new John Grisham novel, but I remembered now that book club met on Wednesdays, not Thursdays. Sandra had been going to book club on Wednesdays for 15 years. Why would she lie about something so simple? After dinner, as we settled into our evening routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger. The woman washing dishes beside me, humming softly as she always did, suddenly seemed like someone I had never really known. Later that night, as Sandra slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Jonas. The name echoed in my mind like a curse. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, how long had I been the fool in my own home? I thought about our children, Emma and Michael, both adults now with families of their own. Emma lived in Portland with her husband and 2 kids, while Michael had settled in Denver. They called regularly, visited for holidays, seemed to genuinely care about both Sandra and me. But now I found myself wondering what they might know that I didn't. The next morning, Sandra seemed unusually cheerful at breakfast, almost manic in her energy. She chattered about her plans for the day, about grocery shopping and meeting her sister for lunch, about a dozen mundane details that felt like smokescreens. I might be late tonight, she said, not looking up from her coffee. Sarah wants to catch up properly. You know how she talks. Sarah, Sandra's sister who lived 3 hours away and rarely visited. Another convenient excuse. After Sandra left, I found myself standing in our kitchen again, staring at the Alexa device. Such a small thing to destroy a marriage. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but there was nothing funny about the situation. I spent the morning going through the motions of my retirement routine, reading the newspaper, checking emails, but my mind kept circling back to that moment when everything changed. The certainty in the device's voice when it called me Jonas. The easy familiarity of it, as if Jonas was a regular presence in this house. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who Jonas was, no matter what it cost me. The investigation began with small things, details that most people would overlook. But when you've lived with someone for 3 decades, you notice when patterns change, when familiar rhythms become slightly offbeat. I started with the bathroom. Sandra had always been meticulous about her personal space, everything in its proper place. But now, looking with suspicious eyes, I noticed things that had been hiding in plain sight. A men's deodorant stick tucked behind her toiletries, different from the brand I used. A larger toothbrush hanging next to hers, the bristles showing recent use. When I held it up to the light, I could see it wasn't mine. Mine was in the medicine cabinet where it had always been. My hands shook as I examined these foreign objects in my own bathroom. How long had they been there? How had I been so blind? In our bedroom, I found more evidence of another man's presence. A cologne bottle on Sandra's dresser that I had never seen before, expensive looking with a label I didn't recognize. I opened it and inhaled a scent that was definitely not mine, something woody and masculine that seemed to cling to the air. The smell was faintly familiar, as if I had caught traces of it on Sandra's clothes or hair, but had never questioned it. The closet revealed the most damning evidence. Pushed far to the back, behind Sandra's winter coats, hung 2 men's shirts. They were sized large, same as mine, but the style was completely different, more fashionable, younger looking, expensive. I checked the labels and found brands I had never heard of, certainly nothing I would have chosen. I sat on our bed, holding one of the shirts, and tried to imagine Sandra shopping for another man, carefully selecting clothes she thought he would like, hanging them in the closet she shared with her husband. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. This wasn't just an affair. This was a double life. When Sandra came home that evening, I was reading in my chair as usual, but every sense was heightened. I watched her movements, listened to her words with new ears. "How was lunch with Sarah?" I asked casually. "Wonderful," she replied, but her cheeks flushed slightly. "She's doing well, sends her love." I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the trusting husband while my mind cataloged every lie. Sarah lived in Sacramento, 3 hours away. Even if Sandra had driven there for lunch, she would have been gone most of the day. But she had only been out for 4 hours. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I paid attention to Sandra's phone habits, noticing how she guarded it more carefully than before, how she took it with her to the bathroom, how she turned it face down whenever she set it on a surface. She had never been protective of her phone before. I started keeping track of her comings and goings, writing down times and excuses in a small notebook I kept hidden in my desk drawer. Book club on Thursday, when it met on Wednesday. Lunch with Sarah, who lived too far away for a quick lunch. Grocery shopping that took 4 hours. Doctor's appointments she had never mentioned before. The pattern was clear once I started documenting it. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. Sandra announced she had to run errands and would be gone most of the day. She seemed excited, almost giddy, in a way I hadn't seen in years. After she left, I decided to follow her. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad movie. But I got in my car and drove the route Sandra usually took to town. I spotted her car at a small cafe on the outskirts of our neighborhood, a place we had never been together. Through the window, I could see her sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. He was about my age, maybe slightly younger, with salt and pepper hair and an easy smile. Sandra was laughing at something he said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. The gesture was intimate, familiar, the touch of a woman who had done this many times before. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching my wife of 32 years be affectionate with another man, and felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but something deeper. My sense of reality, my understanding of who I was and what my life had been. They spent 2 hours at the cafe, talking and laughing like lovers. When they finally left, they walked to the parking lot together, and I watched as the man, this Jonas I now assumed, pulled Sandra into his arms and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of real intimacy. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with questions and implications. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And what did this mean for our children, our family, our entire life together? That evening, Sandra came home with a glow about her that I hadn't seen in years. She hummed while making dinner, smiled for no apparent reason, seemed lighter somehow. I realized with a sick feeling that this was what happiness looked like on my wife. Real happiness, not the polite contentment she showed with me, but genuine joy. "You seem cheerful tonight," I observed, testing. "Do I?" She touched her cheek self-consciously. "I guess I'm just in a good mood." "Any particular reason?" For a moment, she looked like she might tell me something real. Her mouth opened slightly, and I saw something vulnerable in her eyes. But then she closed herself off again, the walls going back up. "Just one of those days," she said with a shrug. "Sometimes you feel happy for no reason." But there was a reason. There was Jonas. That night, as Sandra slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I was going to confront her directly. I couldn't live with the pretense anymore. Couldn't continue this charade of a marriage while my wife lived a secret life with another man. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would approach it, which I would be calm, rational, give her a chance to explain. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation, though I couldn't imagine what it might be. But as I lay there planning my confrontation, a darker thought crept into my mind. If Sandra could lie so easily about lunch dates and book clubs, if she could maintain this deception for however long it had been going on, what else might she be lying about? What other secrets might be hiding in the life I thought I knew? The smart speaker incident was just the beginning, I realized. There were deeper revelations waiting. Truths that would make Jonas seem like the least of my problems. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening. I had spent 3 sleepless nights rehearsing what I would say, how I would handle Sandra's denials, how I would present the evidence I had gathered. But nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. Sandra was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when I finally found the courage to speak. My hands were trembling as I approached her, the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest like a stone. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up from the dishes, and I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. "About what?" she asked, but her tone told me she already knew. "About Jonas." The dish she was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Sandra stared at the broken pieces, then slowly looked up at me. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was barely a whisper. "The Alexa called me Jonas last week. I found his clothes in our closet. I saw you with him at the cafe on Maple Street." Each word felt like pulling a knife from my own chest. "How long, Sandra? How long has this been going on?" She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. When she opened them again, there were tears streaming down her face. 28 years, she whispered. The number hit me like a physical blow. 28 years. Our children were 30 and 26 years old, which meant Before Emma was born, I said, the realization dawning slowly. You were with him before Emma was born. Sandra nodded, unable to speak. And Michael? Another nod. I felt the room spinning around me. I reached for a chair and sat down heavily, my legs no longer able to support me. 28 years of lies. 28 years of raising children who might not even be mine. Are they? I couldn't finish the sentence. Sandra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Emma looks just like you, she said quietly. But Michael. She didn't need to finish. Michael with his dark hair and brown eyes so different from my blue ones. Michael, who had always seemed to march to a different drummer, who had interests and talents that neither Sandra nor I possessed. Michael, who had always felt like a stranger in our family photos. He's Jonas's son, I said, not a question, but a statement. Yes. The single word destroyed 30 years of fatherhood. Every baseball game I had attended, every homework session, every proud moment when Michael accomplished something. I had been loving and supporting another man's child, while that man lived a secret life with my wife. Do they know? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Sandra's silence was answer enough. They know, I said, feeling sick. My children know that Michael isn't my son, and they never told me. It's complicated, Donald, Sandra said, moving toward me. You have to understand. Understand what? I stood up, anger finally cutting through the shock. Understand that my entire family has been lying to me for decades. Understand that I've been raising another man's child while you carried on a relationship right under my nose. You don't know the whole story, she said, her voice gaining strength. Jonas and I, we've been together since college, before I met you. The words kept coming, each one worse than the last. Sandra and Jonas had been high school sweethearts, college lovers, engaged to be married. But Jonas came from a poor family, had no prospects, no stable future. When Sandra's parents introduced her to me, a business student from a well-off family with clear career goals, they pressured her to break up with Jonas and marry me instead. So you married me for money, I said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. I married you for security, she corrected, but I never stopped loving Jonas. And the children? Emma happened right away. We were trying to start a family and she's definitely yours. But then Jonas came back into my life when Emma was 2. He had gotten his degree, found a good job, we reconnected, and she shrugged helplessly. Michael happened. I stared at this woman I had thought I knew, this stranger wearing my wife's face, and you let me believe he was mine. You loved him so much, she said, as if that made it better. You were such a good father to him, better than Jonas could have been at the time. Jonas was traveling for work, trying to establish his career. You were stable, present, reliable. Convenient, I said bitterly. Yes, she admitted, you were convenient. The honesty was somehow worse than the lies. For 30 years I had been convenient, a stable provider, a reliable father figure, a respectable husband to present to the world while Sandra maintained her real relationship in secret. Where does he live? I asked. About 20 minutes away, in that new development past the mall. 20 minutes away. For 28 years my wife's lover had lived 20 minutes away from our home. I thought about all the times Sandra had run quick errands, all the book clubs and lunch dates and shopping trips. How easy it must have been to slip away for a few hours, to maintain a double life when your husband trusted you completely. Do Emma and Michael see him? Do they know him as their father? Sandra's face crumpled. Michael knows. He's known since he was 18. Emma thinks you're both her father, but she knows about Jonas. She knows I love him. And they're okay with this? They're okay with lying to me? They love you, Donald, but they also understand that love is complicated. I laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. Love. You call this love? I do love you, Sandra said desperately, just differently. You've been a wonderful husband, a wonderful father. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did hurt me. Every day for 28 years you hurt me. You were happy, she protested. We had a good life. We raised beautiful children together. We built something real. We built something based on lies. Does that make it less real? I stared at her. This woman who could rationalize 3 decades of deception as if it were a reasonable lifestyle choice. The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been happy most of the time. I had loved our life together, loved being Michael's father, loved the family we had created, but it had all been an illusion, a carefully constructed fantasy that I had been too trusting to see through. What happens now? I asked. Sandra wiped her eyes again. Nothing has to change. Jonas and I, we're not asking for anything different. We're all older now, set in our ways. Why disrupt everything over something that's worked for so long? I stared at her in disbelief. She wanted to continue the arrangement, keep me as the convenient husband while she maintained her real relationship with Jonas, keep playing house while I lived a lie. You think I'm just going to pretend I don't know? I think you'll realize that what we have is still valuable, even if it's not what you thought it was. But as I looked at Sandra, standing in our kitchen among the pieces of broken dishware, I realized she was wrong. What we had wasn't valuable anymore. It was worthless because it had never been real. Sleep became impossible after Sandra's confession. I spent the night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of the deception. But the worst revelations were still to come. The next morning, I called Emma. My hands shook as I dialed her number, unsure of what I would say, but desperate to understand how deep this conspiracy went. "Dad!" Her voice was warm and familiar, the same loving tone she had used since childhood. "How are you? I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." There was a pause. "Okay, what's wrong? Do you know about your mother and Jonas?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was small and guilty. "How did you find out?" Those 5 words confirmed everything. My daughter had known. My little girl, who called me every week, who brought her children to visit, who told me she loved me, had been part of the lie her entire adult life. "Emma," I said, my voice breaking, "how long have you known?" "Since I was in college. Mom told me when I turned 21. She said I was old enough to understand complicated adult relationships." "And Michael?" "Michael's known since high school. Dad, you have to understand." "Understand what? That my own children have been lying to me for years?" "We weren't lying exactly. We didn't want to hurt you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of betrayal from every person I had trusted most. "Did you ever think I had a right to know?" "Of course, but Mom said. She said you were happier not knowing. And you were happy, Dad. You really were. That wasn't your decision to make, Emma." There was crying on the other end of the line. "I know. I felt terrible about it for years. But what were we supposed to do? Destroy our family over something that wasn't really hurting anyone? It was hurting me. Every day it was hurting me, even if I didn't know it. But you were a wonderful father to both of us. Michael loves you so much, Dad. You raised him. You were there for everything important. Biology doesn't change that, doesn't it? Doesn't it change everything?" I hung up before she could answer, unable to bear any more justifications for the unjustifiable. An hour later, Michael called. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear his voice, needed to understand how the boy I had raised, the son I had loved unconditionally, could participate in such a massive deception. "Emma called me," he said without preamble. "She's really upset." "Are you upset, Michael?" "I'm upset that you found out this way. I always thought maybe someday we could tell you properly, when the time was right." "When would the right time be? When I was dying? When it was too late for me to make my own choices about my life?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been struggling with this for years, Dad. Every time I called you, every time we spent time together, I wanted to tell you, but I also didn't want to lose you." "Lose me? You're my dad. The only dad I've ever known. Jonas. He's my biological father, but he's not my dad. You are." The words should have been comforting, but they only made everything worse. This young man I loved, who was calling me Dad with such emotion in his voice, had been living with this secret for 8 years. 8 years of holidays and phone calls and family gatherings where everyone knew the truth except me. "Do you see him? Do you have a relationship with Jonas?" "Sometimes. Maybe once or twice a year. It's awkward, honestly. He tries to be fatherly, but it doesn't feel natural. You're the one who taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework, came to my games. You're the one who was there when I needed a dad, but you never thought I deserved to know that. I thought about telling you a million times, but Mom always said it would destroy everything, that you'd divorce her and our family would fall apart. I was scared, Dad. I was a kid when I found out, and then as I got older, it just became this huge secret that felt impossible to reveal. I understood his position, even as it broke my heart. A teenage boy, learning that his entire family was built on deception, being asked to keep that secret to preserve everyone else's comfort. It was an impossible burden to place on a child. "How did you find out?" I asked. "I needed my birth certificate for college applications. I found it in Mom's desk along with some other papers, medical records, letters. It was all there." "And Emma?" Mom told her when she turned 21, like she said. But Emma had already figured it out. She's smart, you know. She started putting pieces together in high school. So both of my children had spent their teenage years knowing that their father was living a lie. Both of them had gone to college, gotten married, started careers, all while carrying this secret. Both of them had watched me proudly introduce them to friends and colleagues as my children, knowing that at least one of them wasn't biologically mine. Does Jonas know I found out? Mom called him last night. He feels terrible, apparently. He never wanted this to come out. How considerate of him. Dad, he's not a bad guy. This situation, it's not what anyone planned. It's exactly what they planned, Michael. For 28 years, it's exactly what they planned. After I hung up with Michael, I sat in my home office, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of an elaborate hoax. Pictures of me with Michael at his high school graduation, teaching him to drive, helping him move into his first apartment. In every photo, I looked like a proud father, while he looked like a young man carrying the weight of a massive secret. The cruelest part was that my love for him hadn't diminished. If anything, learning that he had struggled with this secret for years made me want to protect him even more. But that protective instinct was at war with my anger at the deception, creating an emotional storm I couldn't navigate. That evening, Sandra found me in the office, staring at a photo from Michael's wedding 3 years earlier. In the picture, I was walking him down the aisle in place of his biological father, a role I had been honored to fill. Now I wondered if it had been another performance, another way to maintain the fiction of our family. "We need to talk about what happens next," Sandra said, sitting down across from my desk. "There's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce." "Donald, please think about this rationally. We're in our 60s. We have grandchildren." "Divorce would devastate everyone. Everyone's already devastated. The difference is that now I know about it. The children are worried sick. Emma's been crying all day. Michael's driving down from Denver this weekend to talk to you." "Good. Maybe it's time we all had an honest conversation." Sandra studied my face, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to manage this crisis like she had managed everything else in our marriage. "Jonas wants to meet with you," she said finally. "Absolutely not. He thinks if you could just talk to him man to man, you might understand the situation better." I laughed bitterly. "Understand what? How he's been sleeping with my wife for 3 decades while I raised his son? How he's been living 20 minutes away while I thought I had a faithful marriage? What exactly is there to understand? How much we all care about you? How much this family means to everyone involved?" "This isn't a family, Sandra. This is a conspiracy." But even as I said the words, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Twisted as it was, these people did care about me. Emma and Michael genuinely loved me, even though they had participated in the deception. Sandra, in her own selfish way, had tried to preserve everyone's happiness by maintaining the status quo. The problem was that their version of caring had required me to live in ignorance. Their love had been conditional on my not knowing the truth about my own life. As Sandra left the office, defeated for the moment, I realized that the hardest part wasn't deciding what to do next. The hardest part was accepting that everything I had thought I knew about love, family, and trust had been wrong from the very beginning. Michael arrived from Denver that weekend, looking haggard and worried. He had always been a serious young man, but now he carried himself like someone bearing an enormous weight. We sat in my office, the same room where I had discovered the truth about our family, and for the first time in 8 years, we had a completely honest conversation. "I've been planning to tell you for months," he said, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I couldn't take the secret anymore. It was eating me alive. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was terrified of losing you. And because Mom kept saying that Jonas was getting older, that maybe he would pass away naturally, and then the whole situation would resolve itself without anyone getting hurt." I stared at my son, this young man I had raised and loved, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Your mother was hoping Jonas would die." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Not hoping exactly, just aware that he has heart problems. He's had 2 minor heart attacks in the past 5 years. And if he died, you would have all just gone on pretending forever. I think that was the general idea, yes." The casual way he said it chilled me. They had all been waiting for Jonas to die so they could avoid the uncomfortable truth. My wife had been planning to carry this secret to her grave, letting me live in ignorance until I died. never knowing that one of my children wasn't biologically mine. There's something else you need to know, Michael said quietly. Something Mom didn't tell you the other night. My stomach clenched. What? Jonas and Mom have been making plans for after you, for when you're older. What kind of plans? Michael looked like he might be sick. They want to move in together officially. They've been waiting for retirement, for the kids to be fully independent. They've been planning their life together for years. The room seemed to tilt. They were planning to wait for me to die? Not exactly. More like waiting for the right time to ask for a divorce, when it would cause the least disruption to everyone else. I laughed, a harsh sound that made Michael flinch. How thoughtful of them. Dad, they do care about you. This whole arrangement, it was supposed to be temporary at first, just until Mom figured out what she really wanted. But then Emma was born, and you were such a good father, and it just became easier to maintain the status quo. Easier for who? For everyone. You were happy. The kids had a stable home. Mom got to keep both relationships. Jonas got to be part of his son's life without the responsibility of being the primary father. It worked. It worked because I didn't know about it. Yes, Michael admitted. It only worked because you didn't know. That evening, Emma arrived with her husband and 2 young children. My grandchildren, ages 5 and 7, ran to me with their usual enthusiasm, completely unaware that their grandfather's world had imploded. I hugged them close, breathing in their innocent sweetness, and wondered what other secrets this family was keeping. After the children were in bed, Emma and I sat on the back porch where I had taught her to identify constellations when she was little. The autumn air was crisp, and I could see my breath as I spoke. I keep thinking about all the times you visited, I said. All the family dinners and holidays. Were you thinking about the secret the whole time? Sometimes, she admitted. But mostly I was just thinking about how much I love you. Dad, you raised me. You taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework, walked me down the aisle at my wedding. You're my father in every way that matters, but not in the way that's true. Truth is complicated. No, Emma. Truth is simple. Everything else is complicated. She was quiet for a long time, staring up at the stars we had studied together so many years ago. I used to lie awake at night feeling guilty about keeping the secret. But then I would think about how devastated you would be, and I convinced myself that protecting you was more important than telling you the truth. You were protecting yourselves, not me, maybe, but we were also protecting this family, our family. Whatever its foundation, it's real to all of us. It's not real if it's based on lies. Then what do we do now? Do we just throw away 30 years because the beginning was messy? I didn't have an answer for her. The love I felt for Emma and Michael was genuine, regardless of biology or deception. The memories we had made together were real, even if they had been built on false pretenses. But the betrayal was also real, and I couldn't simply pretend it hadn't happened. The next day, Sandra made an announcement that stunned even me with its audacity. Jonas wants to come to Sunday dinner, she said over breakfast. He thinks it's time you two met properly. I set down my coffee cup carefully, trying to control my temper. He wants to come to Sunday dinner. He's been part of this family for almost 30 years, Donald. Whether you knew it or not, he's been here. Don't you think it's time to acknowledge that reality? The reality is that he's been having an affair with my wife for 30 years. The reality is more complicated than that. Stop saying that. Stop telling me reality is complicated. Reality is that you cheated on me, lied to me, and convinced our children to lie to me. Reality is simple. But Sandra was determined to manage this situation like she had managed everything else in our marriage. She wanted to normalize the abnormal, to make the unacceptable seem reasonable. He's not going away, Donald. Jonas is part of our lives, whether you acknowledge him or not. We can either handle this like adults, or we can let it destroy everything we've built. It's already destroyed. Not if we don't let it be. That afternoon, while Sandra was out running errands, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on our house. I called a lawyer and began divorce proceedings. I called my bank and moved half of our joint savings into a separate account. I was done being managed, done being the convenient husband, done living in a world where everyone else made decisions about my life while keeping me in the dark. When Sandra came home and found she couldn't get into the house, she called my cell phone in a panic. Donald, what are you doing? I'm taking control of my own life for the first time in 30 years. You can't lock me out of my own house. It's not your house anymore. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Don't be ridiculous. We can work this out. We can all sit down and figure out an arrangement that works for everyone. The arrangement that works for me is one where I'm not married to someone who's been lying to me for 3 decades. There was a long pause, and when Sandra spoke again, her voice was cold. You're making a mistake, Donald. You're going to destroy this family over ancient history. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just finally seeing what was already broken. Fine. But don't expect the children to choose sides. They love Jonas too. I know they do, and that's something I'll have to live with. That night, alone in the house that had been my home for 25 years, I realized that the worst part of the betrayal wasn't even the lying. It was the assumption that I was too weak, too naive, too comfortable to handle the truth. My entire family had decided that I was better off living in ignorance, that I couldn't be trusted with reality. They had been protecting themselves, not me. And now I was finally going to protect myself. The divorce proceedings took 8 months, and every single day was a battle. Sandra fought me on everything, claiming she deserved half of assets she had helped accumulate while living a double life. Her lawyer painted me as a vindictive old man who couldn't forgive past mistakes. My lawyer painted her as a chronic deceiver who had committed matrimonial fraud. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than either narrative. Emma and Michael tried to mediate, begging me to reconsider, to find some way to preserve the family. They didn't understand that the family they wanted to preserve had never really existed. It had been a carefully constructed illusion, and I refused to live inside an illusion anymore. Dad, you're throwing away 30 years over something that doesn't change how much we love you, Emma pleaded during one of our few conversations. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally being honest about what those 30 years actually were. What if Mom agreed to end things with Jonas? What if she chose you? It's too late for that, sweetheart. Even if she ended it tomorrow, I would never trust her again. And I can't live with someone I don't trust. The hardest part was watching my relationships with Emma and Michael deteriorate. They felt caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to me and loyalty to the only family structure they had ever known. Michael especially struggled, since acknowledging my position meant confronting the fact that his entire existence had been based on deception. Jonas, to his credit, never tried to contact me directly. According to Sandra, he felt terrible about the whole situation and had offered to disappear from their lives if it would save our marriage. But it was too little, too late. The damage wasn't just about his relationship with Sandra. It was about the conspiracy of silence that had surrounded it for decades. The house sold quickly. It was a beautiful home in a desirable neighborhood, and Sandra and I split the proceeds according to the divorce decree. She used her half to buy a smaller place closer to town, closer to Jonas. I used mine to purchase a condo on the coast, 3 hours away from everything and everyone who had participated in the deception. During the months of legal proceedings, I had time to think about what I wanted my new life to look like. I was 65 years old, healthy, financially secure, and for the first time in decades, completely free to make my own choices. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I joined a hiking group, something I had always wanted to do, but never found time for during my marriage. I started taking photography classes, learning to see the world through a different lens. I volunteered at the local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned dogs who asked nothing of me except kindness. Slowly, carefully, I began building a life based on truth instead of convenient fiction. Emma reached out first, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tentative and sad. I miss you, Dad. I miss you too, sweetheart. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could I come visit? Just me and the kids? I thought about it for a long moment. Are you going to try to convince me to reconcile with your mother? No, I just want to see my dad. She came the following weekend, driving down from Portland with my grandchildren. It was awkward at first, both of us dancing around the elephant in the room. But watching my 5-year-old granddaughter collect seashells on the beach, seeing my 7-year-old grandson's excitement over spotting dolphins in the distance, I remembered what was still real and good in my life. I'm sorry, Emma said as we walked along the water's edge while the children played. I'm sorry we lied to you. I'm sorry we thought we knew what was best for you. I'm sorry it took losing you to realize how wrong we were. I'm sorry too, I said. I'm sorry our family was built on something so fragile that the truth could destroy it. Do you think you'll ever forgive us? I'm working on it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Michael was slower to reach out, which I understood. His position was more complicated, his guilt deeper. When he finally called 2 months after Emma's visit, his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know how to be your son anymore," he said. "You don't have to know. You just have to be honest with me from now on." "Are you still my dad?" The question broke my heart. Biology doesn't determine fatherhood, Michael. Love does. I loved you when I thought you were my biological son, and I love you now that I know you're not. That hasn't changed. But everything else has changed. Yes, everything else has changed. He visited a month later, and we spent 3 days fishing and talking. For the first time in his adult life, Michael told me everything. About growing up with The Secret, about the pressure he felt to protect everyone's feelings, about his relationship with Jonas, about the guilt that had been eating him alive for years. "I used to fantasize about you finding out," he admitted as we sat on my deck watching the sunset. "I would imagine how relieved I would feel when I didn't have to carry the secret anymore. But I never imagined how much it would hurt everyone. The hurt was always there, Michael, hidden under the surface, poisoning everything. At least now it's out in the open where we can deal with it. Do you hate Jonas?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't hate him. I think he's a coward who took the easy path for 30 years, but I don't hate him. I hate what the situation did to all of us. He asks about you sometimes, how you're doing, whether you're happy. And what do you tell him?" "I tell him you're building a new life, an honest one." 6 months later, I met someone. Her name was Carol. She was a widow in her early 60s, and she had joined the same hiking group I belonged to. She was straightforward and honest, with laugh lines around her eyes and a refreshing lack of drama in her personal history. We started as friends, hiking partners who enjoyed each other's company on the trails. Gradually, we became something more. She knew about my divorce, about the circumstances that had led me to start over at 65. She listened without judgment and shared her own story of loss and renewal. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone completely again?" she asked one evening as we watched the sunset from a mountain overlook. "I'm learning to trust myself first," I said. "Everything else comes after that." Carol smiled. "That's probably the wisest approach." A year after my divorce was finalized, Sandra remarried. She and Jonas had a small ceremony with just Emma, Michael, and a few close friends. I learned about it through Emma, who called to tell me she thought I should know. "Are you okay with it?" she asked carefully. "I'm relieved," I said honestly. "Now they can stop pretending and just live their truth. They seem happy. I hope they are. Everyone deserves to be happy." "Even after everything they put you through?" "Especially after everything they put me through. Happiness based on lies isn't really happiness. Maybe now they can find the real thing." 2 years later, I married Carol in a simple ceremony on the beach near my condo. Emma and Michael both attended, along with my grandchildren and Carol's family. It was a small gathering, but every person there was someone I trusted completely, someone who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. As I stood on the sand, holding Carol's hands and promising to love and honor her, I thought about the difference between this wedding and my first one 34 years earlier. This time, there were no secrets, no hidden agendas, no convenient arrangements. Just two people who had found each other after learning the hard way what they needed in a partner. Sandra sent a card, which surprised me. Inside she had written, "I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Thank you for being a wonderful father to our children, and for eventually finding the strength to save yourself." It was, perhaps, the first completely honest thing she had ever said to me. Now, at 68, I wake up every morning in a home filled with truth instead of comfortable lies. Carol and I plan trips together, share meals without hidden agendas, and go to bed each night knowing exactly who we are to each other. My relationships with Emma and Michael are different than they used to be, more careful but also more genuine. My grandchildren visit regularly, and I'm teaching them to identify seabirds the way I once taught their parents to identify constellations. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never asked Alexa to play love songs that day, if I had remained ignorant for the rest of my life. Would I have been happier living the lie? Would ignorance truly have been bliss? But every time I consider the question, I come to the same conclusion. A life built on truth, Even painful truth is worth more than a life built on comfortable deceptions. I would rather face reality than live in the most beautiful illusion ever created. The smart speaker sits on my kitchen counter now, a reminder of the day my real life began. Sometimes Carol asks it to play music, and it responds with perfect recognition, calling her by name, making no mistakes about who belongs in this house. Truth, I've learned, is the only foundation solid enough to build a real life on. Everything else is just pretending.